This is the 415ers podcast, as always, coming to you on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network twice a week here in the offseason, 3 times a week in season, which we finally know when will begin, who they're going to play, because the NFL schedule was released as we're recording this on Wednesday. For those of you listening on Thursday, we very much appreciate it. Please go to the Odyssey app, download it, rate, subscribe to the podcast. Also check out a host of other podcasts. We very much appreciate it. That's Marc, Grandi. I'm Evan Giddings. Okay, Marc, as far as the schedule for the 49ers, you mentioned the Eagles. I had a chance to also look at what the rest of the West is doing in the NFC. And this, I understand Seattle is a threat, and I know they had a pretty good draft as well. But this should be the 49ers division for the taking. And I think that's reflected in their win total. They're 11.5. Seattle's 8.5. The Rams are 7.5. The Cardinals are 5.5, which I think is a little bit generous. But if you had to sort of, I guess, go through, first we'll start with the 49ers, but just kind of the rest of the teams. I don't know, if you had to take an over-under guess on these 4 groups, where would your mind and your bets lean?
So let me make sure I have the numbers right. SF 11.5.
Yep.
Seattle, what was Seattle's number?
8.5.
8.5. LA?
7.5.
7.5, and then 5.5 for Arizona, right?
Yes.
I think the Niners number at 11.5 is pretty spot on. I don't think the 49ers are able to repeat 13 wins like they did last year. Last year, I think I picked 12, but 11 to me feels good to me. I think I might go 11-6 for the 49ers this year. If there was a little bit more clarity regarding the quarterback position, Evan, I think I'd be more tempted to take the over and say they're getting to 12 wins. And I know we will get to what Kyle Shanahan said here in just a little bit. He seems confident about Brock Purdy's progress. But still, I think the question in the quarterback room is enough for me to take the under, but I would be uncomfortable betting that one. I think 11, I feel perhaps most strongly that the Arizona Cardinals are not winning 6 games. So I think I'd take the under on that one. If I had to just take one bet from this group, I think it might be Arizona's under. That's the one I feel most strongly about.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think 11.5 is right, but I also feel confident in saying the 49ers should be at the least 12-5. And I know that there's some speculation about the quarterback position, which we'll get into. Kyle Shanahan feels confident. I also feel confident, and I feel optimistic in this team because of their roster, because of their trajectory, and because, quite frankly, of their division. I think the Rams are not going to win 7 games. Or 8 games, I guess. So I would take the under on 7.5. I would absolutely take the under and hammer it on Arizona. The Rams this year have the 9th toughest schedule in the NFL. They play 9 road games, and really outside of the beginning of their schedule, it gets kind of tough when you're looking at the amount of playoff teams they have. Speaking of which, Arizona starts their season with 6 of 8 playoff teams from last year. And I believe by that point, even with Kyler Murray probably available optimistically for the last 6-7 games of the season, by that point, they're going to be so far out of it, you might even consider not even bringing him back at all. And then Seattle, I'm very curious to see how they respond this year. They're tied for the 12th toughest schedule, but they're going to be playing this year with expectation, which they did not have any sort of expectation last year. I know that heading into, I think it's week 5, they have a favorable schedule. They get Cincinnati in week 5, so they could potentially be looking at a 3-2 or 4-1 start. But I expect some regression from Geno Smith. I expect that defense to be with a full year of tape around it, taking advantage of it a little bit more, kind of like the 49ers did in the playoffs last year. I don't see them getting to 9 wins, and I expect the 49ers to get above 11 wins. So, I mean, I right now, I would lean under on the rest of the division. It sounds kind of like a homer pick, but then the 49ers, I would take the over on. I'll go 12-5. That'll be my prediction this year for the 49ers.
All right. Well, I'm going to stick with 11-6 for now. I think our plan, we haven't talked about this explicitly yet, but once we get closer to the start of the season, we'll come out with more detailed predictions for the season and how it all plays out. But if I had to pick right now, I think I'd say 11-6. But again, subject to change. I don't know how I feel about Seattle because I'm at this spot where I don't feel like it's cool or right or fair to not believe in Geno Smith anymore because he had such a great year. But I'm still just hesitant. I really think they've done a fantastic job. Their front office has, as much as it pains me to say, the last two off seasons, specifically in the draft, they haven't made a ton of noise free agency wise. I still don't think they really have addressed their defensive line, which was an issue last year. They do not rush the quarterback, and I think that's going to come back to bite them again this year, Evan. But their draft class from last year is just fantastic, and logic would say that they're going to get better this year. And I thought they had a fantastic draft. I know we'll also dive into each NFC West team as well once we get closer towards the start of the season and focus on how their off seasons went. I think Seattle probably maybe had the best offseason of the division. We can talk more about that later, but I'm at the spot where I love everything about their roster except for a couple of spots, and one of those spots is the quarterback, but I feel bad not believing in Geno Smith because he had just such a storybook year last year. If I felt a little more confident about them, I would easily take the over for Seattle. But I just can't bring myself to do that with Geno Smith at quarterback.
Yeah, and I don't expect him to fall back into the Geno of the New York Jets or the guy that was the journeyman prior to last year. I just don't think he can replicate the kind of, I mean, frankly, dominant season that he had as a quarterback. He was unbelievable, especially in that first half. And I think we saw the second half of the season, the kind of quarterback that will show up for the majority of this year. Not to say he's not good, but a top potential 7 quarterback in the NFL, I do not think Geno Smith is. Um, I do have a bit of a bold prediction, though. And if you have one,
Okay.
you can share it. But my bold prediction, based on the NFL schedule that was released for the 49ers, they will clinch the division in week 12 in Seattle on Thursday Night Football. That is when they will take the NFC West. They will get revenge for 2014 when Richard Sherman and Russell Wilson were eating turkey legs at Levi's Stadium, essentially locking up the division for that year. The 49ers fell off a cliff at the end of that game. The 49ers, instead of Sherman and Wilson, it's going to be Brock and Bosa eating turkey legs on Thanksgiving at Seattle. They will win the division there. They won it last year in Seattle. They do it again at Lumen Field this season. They get it done the first time right before they head to Philadelphia on Thanksgiving night.
That is an early clinch. Wow, you taking the under big time for Seattle then, huh? I mean,
Yep.
that's week. I mean, that's the Niners' 11th game of the year. So what? You think they're going to be on an 8-3 at that point with a win, and still have? Oh, they might have to be 10-1 at that point to clinch that early. I mean, maybe I don't know, but
It's a bold prediction, Mark.
true, true.
And I mean, hey, Kyle Shannon seems pretty confident he's going to have his signal caller under center. So that guy hasn't lost a game yet. Who knows? They might be 11-0.
You're right. You're right. We'll get to that in a second. I did just want to make sure we explicitly said. I know you mentioned the national television games, 5 of them. I
Mm-hmm.
do think there's a chance that they get at least 6. So we talked about that Philadelphia game between those 2 Seattle games. That is not currently a nationally televised game, but at that point of the season, you often have games flexed into Sunday Night Football. So if both the Eagles and the 49ers are on the trajectory that we expect, perhaps that game does get flexed in. Just something to keep an eye on there. But I did want to explicitly say we're talking a lot about this Thanksgiving game in Seattle. Thursday Night Football, third game of the NFL's Thanksgiving slate, November 23rd in Seattle, week 12. Then a handful of weeks later, the 49ers at home against the Ravens on Christmas Day. And that's a nationally televised game as well. So the 49ers play on Thanksgiving, they play on Christmas Day, and then the next week they play at the Washington Commanders on New Year's Eve. So I know it's just sometimes the way that the calendar falls, when you have those holidays falling on Saturdays or Sundays and Mondays, you have teams playing in those games, but the 49ers will be featured on Thanksgiving, on Christmas Day, and on New Year's Eve. Kind of wild.
It is pretty interesting. No, they have a lot of, I think, I don't know, kind of unique games, and especially like last year, I think was a little more projectable just because of the ups and downs. The travel was a little more consistent at the beginning, less so towards the end, and it was very front loaded as opposed to kind of an easier schedule towards the back. This year, it's kind of all over the place. So it's interesting, but I do have confidence that the 49ers, again, can be just about ready to wrap this baby up by week 12. We shall see.